Ignatius was never a monk. He was a priest, yes, and he was a religious, but he never was one who wanted to escape the world. In fact, he was known for loving to stand outside of his office in Rome and stare at the stars at night. And he would use a lot of these inspired moments to help us not get out of the world, but to immerse ourselves into the world. When we look at the book of Genesis, we start to see the fundamental answer, the Jewish and Christian answer at least, to the beginnings of humanity. And there we see a beautiful story in which God creates everything being good. And I think part of our understanding of what a spiritual life hack might entail is not getting out of the world, but entering into the world with a certain ability to order our loves and a certain ability to understand that everything we do leads us either closer to or further from the wholeness for which we've been made. For you and I are the only creatures who are made in the image and likeness of another. We're the only creatures who are made for relationship. And this is a key aspect, I think, when understanding the spiritual life. That what it means to be holy for the Christian is not simply to have a clean conscience or a clean slate. It's not to keep the rules or fulfill some obligation. It's allowing the one in whose image and likeness we're made to enter our lives and become like this one. And that's what we see in the book of Genesis, that God created Adam in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And then when we get to the last verse of Genesis 1, we see God looks over all things and says, "It is very good." Evening came, morning followed, the sixth day. Notice something. Every day in the book of Genesis gets its own, and it is good, it is good, it is good. But the sixth day on which you and I are created, God looks over all things and says, "It is very good." St. Augustine, a 5th century Catholic bishop, was the first to realize that the day on which you and I are created doesn't have its own stamp of approval. It doesn't have its own, and it is finished, because you and I are the only creatures who are made for collaborating with God in our own happiness. St. Augustine in that same homily goes on to say, God who had to create you without you refuses to save you without you. And I think this is why we have Now You Know Media. This is why we have spiritual books. This is why we have opportunities for retreat, that you and I have to play a part in our salvation, that God's love will never drag us into heaven if we don't want to go, nor will it send us to hell if we don't want to go. That ultimately you and I have to form our desires rightly because we are free, and that sovereign gift of free will determine our destiny. And this is why we draw from the saints. This is why we draw from those men and women who have lived this life with great integrity and holiness. So when we go back to Ignatius, we start to see how deeply he appreciated the book of Genesis and everything it represented, that this world is good, that there are no evil things, perhaps just the evil use of good things. And he understood that the human person has been created for a certain union, because you and I are made in the image and likeness of a triune God. And Ignatius went on to give us the exercises. And during the first week of the spiritual exercises, he really does emphasize the sense of our own life experience. Where is it we've been this past year? What is the overarching emotion or feeling in our life right now? What is our major desire? What is it we're after or seeking at this very moment? And that might be a helpful thing for each of us to do periodically throughout the week, to stop and say, where have I been with you, Jesus? Where am I with you right now? What will I do for you? To look back at our life in that kind of triune way, in the past, present, and future. Because by forming these questions and being able to answer them a little bit each day, we start to build up an understanding of who we are. Ignatius was really, in some ways, a 16th century therapist. He understood deeply the depths of the human soul. He understood that you and I can be easily enigmas to our own selves. And if we can't understand ourselves, how much more should we expect to understand anyone else? Spirituality, in the best of the Christian sense, is really also a growth in self-awareness, understanding who we are. What is it that motivates us? What does really matter to us? Because God, in the Christian understanding of creation, has asked us to state to him what it is we want. He has asked us to give him our heart's desires. All throughout the Psalms, we hear lines like that. Honor the Lord, and he will grant you the desires of your heart. Well, what are those desires? What are we after? Because for St. Ignatius, that's really where spirituality begins. What is it you want? Because you will ultimately get it. If you want God, he'll give you himself. If you want things apart from God, we'll ultimately get them. And that's why it's so important to form our consciences rightly. When Ignatius sat down at Manresa to compose the spiritual exercises,